the quiet hours before dawn, when the world stops moving, there is a school that refuses to sleep. This is no legend. This is documented. Welcome to Tales of the Dark. And if you dare to stay through what you're about to hear, subscribe before the lights flicker out. The building was once known as Ridgefield Public School, a cheerful place filled with students, teachers, and bright morning assemblies. But everything changed after a teacher named Mrs. Hallen vanished without a trace. One moment she was grading papers in her classroom, the next, she was gone. No forced entry, no exit recorded, no explanation. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said she walked out during a rainstorm and never came back. Others whispered that something inside the school called to her, and she followed. After her disappearance, the school's atmosphere shifted. Students complained about hearing footsteps when they stayed late. Chairs would be found stacked in unusual patterns. Classroom lights flickered whenever someone said her name. But everything escalated after the school permanently closed. The power was cut, the entrances sealed, the classrooms emptied. Yet, security cameras kept recording movement, doors opening, lights turning on, and shadows pacing the hallways. The strangest part, it always began at exactly 3:17 a.m. The town hired new security guards after the alarms started triggering nightly, but none stayed longer than 2 nights. They all reported the same pattern. The hallway lights would flicker. One door would open, then another, as if someone invisible was walking from classroom to classroom. And always, the final door to open was room 12, Mrs. Hallen's old classroom. A janitor who once worked there described hearing chalk writing on the board late at night, even though he was alone. When he checked the classroom, the words had already been erased, as if someone didn't want him to see them. Another guard claimed he heard soft humming, the lullaby Mrs. Hallen used to sing to her students. The melody drifted from the intercom system, a system that had no power. As these incidents escalated, the town council installed a new set of high-definition security cameras, and what they captured is still considered one of the most unsettling pieces of footage the district has ever recorded. On a rainy night, at 3:17 a.m., every classroom door on the first floor opened one by one in a perfect sequence. Not fast, not slow, almost like someone taking attendance, moving room to room. But the most disturbing part wasn't the opening doors. It was the faint voice recorded at the end of the hallway. A woman whispering, "Present. End of part 1. Part 2 begins now." Subscribe to Tales of the Dark before the shadows follow you. The story of Ridgefield Public School doesn't end with a whispered word in an empty hall. It gets deeper, darker, after the footage of the opening doors and the disembodied voice went public. A small group of paranormal investigators received permission to spend a night inside. They were a team of 4, armed with thermal cameras, EMF detectors, and digital voice recorders. They were skeptics, but they were about to have their beliefs shattered. They set up their base camp in the old gymnasium, the one place where no specific activity had ever been reported. For the first few hours, it was silent. Nothing but the sound of the wind rattling the old window frames. The team started to think it was all just an elaborate hoax. Then, at 3:17 a.m., the gymnasium's main scoreboard, which hadn't had power in years, lit up. The numbers flickered wildly before settling on 2 digits, 1 and 2. Room 12, Mrs. Hallen's room. Taking this as a direct invitation, 2 of the investigators, Mark and Sarah, decided to head to the first floor. The other 2, Ben and Chloe, monitored from the gym. As Mark and Sarah walked down the main hallway, their EMF meters began to spike erratically. The air grew cold, so cold they could see their breath. They reached room 12. The door was closed, just as it had been when they first arrived. Mark reached for the handle, but before he could touch it, it turned on its own. The door creaked open slowly, revealing the classroom, bathed in moonlight from the large windows. It was empty. The desks were in neat rows, a fine layer of dust covering everything. Nothing seemed out of place. They stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind them. Back in the gym, Ben and Chloe lost all communication. The walkie-talkies hissed with static. The camera feeds went black. All they could hear was a faint, rhythmic tapping coming through their audio equipment. Tap, tap, tap. It was the sound of a ruler hitting a desk, over and over again. Inside room 12, Mark and Sarah were plunged into darkness. They fumbled for their flashlights, their beams cutting through the black. As they swept the room, the light caught something on the chalkboard. Words were appearing, written in a frantic, messy script. "Where are they?" it read. Then, "Are they safe?" Suddenly, all the desks in the classroom began to rattle violently. A child's sing-song voice echoed around them, but it was distorted, warped. It sounded like it was being played backward. Sarah, a seasoned investigator, started to feel a deep, unexplainable sadness wash over her. It felt like grief, but it wasn't her own. She felt a desperate need to find something, someone. Mark, meanwhile, was focused on the teacher's desk at the front of the room. A single drawer was slowly sliding open. He approached cautiously. Inside, he saw an old class register. He picked it up, blowing the dust off the cover. It was Mrs. Hallen's register from the year she disappeared. He opened it. The tapping from the gym stopped. The static on the radios cleared. Chloe and Ben heard Sarah's voice, but it was strained, terrified. "Mark, don't," she pleaded, but it was too late. Mark ran his finger down the list of names. Every single student was marked absent for the last day of school, all except one. The last name on the list, a new name, written in fresh ink. The name was Mark. Just then, the temperature in the room plummeted. The distorted lullaby began to play again, this time not from the intercom, but from right behind them. Mark and Sarah spun around. Standing in the corner of the room was a tall, shadowy figure. It had no face, no features, just a void in the shape of a person. It raised a long, thin arm and pointed directly at the class register in Mark's hand. A voice filled the room, cold and hollow. It wasn't the whisper from the hallway. It was a commanding, stern voice, the voice of a teacher demanding an answer. "Mark," it said, "present or absent?" Terrified, Mark dropped the book. The figure vanished. All the activity stopped. The lights on their equipment returned to normal. The door to room 12 swung open, revealing the empty hallway. They fled, leaving their equipment behind. When the team reviewed their audio recordings later, they captured the entire event. But they also captured something else. After Mark and Sarah ran out of the room, after a full minute of silence, a faint, childish giggle can be heard, followed by a soft whisper. "He's present now." The investigators never returned. The school remained sealed. But some nights, if you stand outside the rusted gates of Ridgefield Public School, you might see a single light turn on in a second-story window. The light in room 12. They say Mrs. Hallen is still taking attendance, waiting for her students to come back. And she's added a few new names to her list. That's all the time we have for tonight. But the dark has many more tales to tell. If you made it this far, make sure you're subscribed. You never know whose story we'll tell next. Stay safe, and whatever you do, don't look behind you. The hour the school wakes up, but who, or what, is walking its hallways? After the footage leaked, a wave of investigators and paranormal researchers descended upon the abandoned school. Each one arrived with a healthy dose of skepticism, convinced the recordings were nothing more than tricks of light, dust particles, or even a clever hoax. They were all certain there was a perfectly logical explanation, but none of them stayed confident for long. One of the first to enter was a seasoned paranormal researcher, a man who had debunked hundreds of hauntings. His method was simple: place high-sensitivity audio recorders throughout the building and let them run for 24 hours. He set them up in classrooms, the gymnasium, the principal's office, and even the eerie, silent library. When he returned the next day to collect his equipment, a cold knot of unease tightened in his stomach. He expected to hear the usual creaks and groans of an old building settling, maybe the sound of wind whistling through broken windows. Instead, every single device had captured the exact same sequence of sounds. It began with the distinct, dry scratch of chalk writing on a blackboard. The sound was so clear you could almost picture the letters forming. This was followed by the soft, crisp rustle of papers being turned, one by one, as if a teacher was methodically reviewing a stack of assignments. And then came the most unsettling sound of all, a soft, almost gentle voice, calling out student names. But these weren't names from the school's old yearbooks. They were modern names of children who had uneven been born when the school's doors were chained shut decades ago, while the audio evidence sent shivers down the spines of the investigators. A local historian was busy digging through the town's dusty archives, hoping to find a clue in the school's past. He sifted through old property records, meeting minutes, and faded newspapers. And then he found it. Tucked away in a box of miscellaneous employee files was a formal complaint filed by a teacher named Eleanor Hallen, dated just a few months before the school was permanently closed. Mrs. Hallen's complaint was detailed and filled with a growing sense of dread. She wrote that her classroom, room 12, felt occupied at night. She described the unnerving sensation of being watched while she stayed late to grade papers. She wrote about seeing movement in the reflection of the dark classroom windows, a fleeting shape that would vanish the moment she turned around. She mentioned hearing the soft shuffle of footsteps walking directly behind her, only to find the room completely empty. She documented how papers on her desk would be rearranged when her back was turned, how her chalk would be found in a different spot on the ledge. Her entries grew more frantic over time, but it was her last written entry in the record that was the most chilling. It was short, just 5 simple words, underlined twice with a heavy, forceful hand. "It wants my attention." After that entry, there were no more complaints from Mrs. Hallen. In fact, there were no more records of her at all. To understand what happened next, what finally drove everyone away from the school for good, we have to examine the final known recording made inside its walls. A security contractor had been hired by the town to do a final sweep, to assess the structural integrity and security of the building before it was officially condemned. He was remotely reviewing the camera angles from his van parked just outside the school gates. As he clicked through the feeds, he noticed something impossible. The light in room 12 was on. A dim, sickly yellow glow emanated from the 3rd floor window, even though the entire school's electricity had been cut off for years. Thinking it was a glitch or some kind of reflection, he zoomed the camera in, tightening the focus on the classroom window. And that's when he saw it. A shadow, a dark silhouette, was sitting perfectly still at the teacher's desk. Its outline was unmistakably human, resembling a woman with her shoulders hunched forward, her head tilted down as if she were meticulously grading papers. The contractor stared at his monitor, his breath catching in his throat. He couldn't move, couldn't look away. Then, as if it sensed it was being watched, the figure lifted its head. The movement was slow, deliberate, and unnatural. It turned its head, inch by agonizing inch, until it was facing directly toward the camera. And then the screen went black. The feed was dead. After that night, no one entered the school again. The town officially barred access, erecting fences and posting warning signs, but the recordings never stopped. The motion-activated cameras, still running on their long-lasting battery packs, continued to capture activity. Every single night, at the same exact time, the silent digital eyes of the cameras would record a strange and lonely routine. A chair in an empty classroom would slide out from a desk on its own. A book would fall from a library shelf with no one there to push it. A shadow would drift silently across the main hall, moving with a purpose that defied explanation. A classroom door would swing shut and click, a soft final sound, as if a diligent teacher was locking up for the night before heading home. And twice, in the dead of winter, the exterior motion sensors detected something walking down the long, dark main hallway. The sensor data tracked the movement all the way to the front doors of the school. There, the presence would pause, lingering for several long minutes, as if someone was standing there, checking to see if it was finally time to leave. But the doors never opened. The presence would always turn and retreat back into the darkness of the building. Locals now avoid the school after sunset. The stories have become a part of the town's folklore, whispered warnings passed down to curious teenagers. Some claim that when the air is perfectly still and the moon is hidden behind the clouds, you can hear the faint, distant ringing of the old school bell. Others swear they've seen a silhouette in the third-floor window of room 12, a lonely figure watching the road below, as if waiting for someone to arrive. But the oldest and most persistent rumor remains the same. Mrs. Hallen never left. She's still there, trapped within the decaying walls of her classroom, and every night, she still takes attendance, her spectral voice calling out the names of students she believes she's waiting for, students who will never arrive. This was the story of the school that opens by itself at 3:17 a.m. You've been watching Tales of the Dark. To see more haunted histories and cursed stories, subscribe before the lights go out.